Good evening. I am Mariette Westermann, Vice Chancellor of NWO Abu Dhabi, and welcome to all of you here in the evening, or as the case may be, in the morning if you're in the Western Hemisphere, or at night if you're points east. Please, I'm delighted to welcome two very distinguished diplomats, Ambassador John Rakolta Jr. and Ambassador Lody Embrechts, and I will ask them to show us their faces by turning on their video so we can begin. Welcome to both of you. This is our fifth Vice Chancellor's Roundtable of the academic year. And as many of you who are here know, we are holding these conversations with leaders in the UAE and well beyond in many sectors of society and the economy, public and private, local and international, large and small. And in these conversations, we've been learning about fundamentals and change in various industries and civic enterprises. We gain perspective on different ways of being a leader and about crafting a life of purpose, of contribution and meaning in different walks of life. We hear how leaders reflect on their education and what it has meant to their trajectories, personally and professionally. Thus far this year, we have spoken with leaders in real estate and urban development in Dubai, in banking and finance. We've spoken to leaders in media, film and communications. And this evening, we will speak about diplomacy and what it means to be an ambassador, a term I always thought had incredible resonance growing up. As NWO Abu Dhabi is a resolutely international university in the UAE, with students and faculty from 120 countries and as many languages, diplomacy and its purposes is a topic of great interest to our students and faculty, both as an academic subject and as a potential career opportunity for our graduates. We are very fortunate to have two extremely effective ambassadors, practitioners of the trade, with us. They also happen to represent the two countries of which I am a citizen, the United States of America and the Netherlands, my native country. I will introduce them in a minute and start a conversation and weave in, as always, your questions, which you are encouraged to put in the Q&A function of Zoom. And as always, we also will leave some time at the end. We'll talk for about 50 minutes or so, let things unfold, but you can start putting in your questions at any time and they will be monitored and we will put them to our guests. So let me introduce them, and I will do so in diplomatic alphabetical order. First, Ambassador Lody Embrechts. After receiving his degree in corporate law from Leiden University in the Netherlands, Ambassador Embrechts joined public service in 1990 as second secretary at the Dutch embassy in Tehran, across the water. He served as the head of the economic department at the Dutch embassy in Seoul, South Korea thereafter, and he was then appointed deputy head of mission at the embassy of the Netherlands to the UAE. That was his first tour of duty here. Ambassador Embrechts moved away from diplomatic service for a season to work with Shell as an international government relations advisor. He then resumed public service in 2005 as the Dutch ambassador to Malaysia, where he served until 2009. In 2015, he was accredited as Dutch ambassador to South Korea and North Korea, a position he held until 2019, when he was appointed Dutch ambassador to the UAE. The Honorable John Rakolta Jr., our other guest, was the most recent ambassador of the United States to the UAE. Former Ambassador Rakolta earned his bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Marquette University in Wisconsin. Prior to his service as an ambassador, he was a business executive and civic leader in Detroit, Michigan for many years. He served as chairman and CEO of Wallbridge, a family-owned construction company. Ambassador Rakolta also worked with the Detroit Public School System, the Coalition for the Future of Detroit School Children, and the Metropolitan Affairs Coalition, among other civil society organizations. His advocacy work for the community earned him the title of Michiganian of the Year in 2018, I always thought it was Michigander, but Michiganian of the Year for 2018. And he also won the 2005 Woodrow Wilson Award for Corporate Citizenship from the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars of the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. John Rakolta Jr. served as ambassador of the US to the UAE from September 2019 to January 2021. Surely one of the more tumultuous periods in global, in international life for both of you. When you think about both these ambassadors arriving here at the same time in the fall of 2019. Welcome from NWO Abu Dhabi to both of you. As a citizen of the two countries you represent, I first of all want to say how incredibly grateful I am for your service to our countries and for all that you have done in the UAE, the third country that I call home. Your contributions and those of your staffs in supporting all of us and your communities here during the pandemic have been essential. Welcome. So let us begin with some questions. I have some questions that really are broadly about diplomacy. I will sort of go back and forth between the two ambassadors and we'll have a bit of a conversation. Let me still stay in alphabetical order and then we'll just mix it up and ask this first question, because so many of our students are very interested in international relations, diplomacy, contributing to a more peaceful world. And they're very curious about the path that it takes to become a diplomat. How do you do it? And it's of course different in different countries, but you have very different pathways. And so it seems interesting to start there. Can you please talk a little about how you knew you wanted to be an ambassador and how you came to be one and to such a significant posting as the UAE? Maybe Ambassador Embrechts, I can begin with you.
Well, thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this. And it's really a very special honor for me to be here today and to talk with all of you. You're asking two questions, basically. First of all, becoming a diplomat, and the second thing is becoming an ambassador. And for me, becoming a diplomat it went like this. First of all, you didn't tell that, I became a teacher. I studied to be a teacher. And then I decided later on, okay, that's not really what I want to be. So I started studying law. I studied business law and tax law. And having my degree, I thought, well, I can do two things. I can start working for a corporate. I can start working for a company and dive into either the finance world or energy world or whatever it is. But what I really wanted to is to get a better understanding from a kind of general perspective on what it was like to do international business and what the Dutch government could do to support companies abroad. So that's why I knocked on the door of the Foreign Ministry. And at that point in time, I was a little bit lucky because the Foreign Ministry was moving away a little bit from diplomacy being about politics alone. They saw that the corporate interests were growing and that the role the embassies could play in forwarding business proposals, etc., was growing as well. So that's why I landed in the Foreign Ministry and got my first job in Tehran, indeed, in the economic department. Difficult time to see what we could do to get Dutch foothold into the economic community over there. You want me to answer the question about being an ambassador at the same time, or you want to come back to me later on that one?
Well, why don't you narrate a little bit how you can say a little bit more about this, what your path was. You've already said so interestingly that there are different jobs within embassies. This is very important, different areas. Yeah. So how did you become a full-on ambassador? How did that happen?
Well, to be again frank with you, I never cared so much about titles. For me, the work I had to do, the job I could do was far more interesting than the label you put on it, so to speak, right? So I always followed my heart in a way. This is what I like to do, so I'll go for it and I'll do my very best. I guess the turnaround point was when I became a Consul General in Dubai after my first posting in Abu Dhabi, where they asked me to reposition the Dutch Consulate General in Dubai because Dubai was opening up. Business ties were developing very rapidly over there. more and more companies were landing, and I was given the responsibility to make sure that our Consulate General would be ready for that. And then you enter a little bit a different scene. You enter a different scene in the sense that you become also a manager. You develop a strategy, you develop a vision. And I guess through that, well, I got noticed in The Hague, so to speak, in my head office. And after that, they sent me to Iraq with the mission, okay, see what kind of reconstruction projects are coming up in Iraq, and communicate that to the Dutch industry in Dubai, and see what you can do for them in Iraq itself. So that's what I did afterwards. Long story short, I left the foreign ministry for a little while, and I returned in Malaysia. And that was my first full-time ambassadorship, again, with a very much a focus on business and industry, because Malaysia, for us, is an energy hub in the region. And then after Malaysia, things developed in a certain way as well.
It's a great story, and we'll come back to delve into it a little bit more. I would like to ask the same question, Ambassador Rakolta, if you would speak to how you found yourself to become an ambassador. Was it ever on your radar? Tell us a little bit about your journey, please. And you're on mute. Thank you.
There we go. Let me just first by thanking you for the opportunity to have this conversation with you and your students. I think these kind of sessions are very, very important to share experiences and help guide the responsibility for the future of our world to students like yours, and let me applaud them for their hard work choosing such a great university, and let me thank you for this opportunity. It's very well appreciated. My journey's an unusual one. I think I first would start by saying that the United States and I believe Australia are really the only two countries in the world who have what I would call a bicameral kind of a system for ambassadors. In the United States, we have both career ambassadors. These are individuals who work their way up in the State Department and make diplomacy a career. Then there are political ambassadors, and these are handpicked by the president to specifically represent him. Generally speaking, you're already in alignment in terms of philosophy because you've helped support the election of that particular president. And you've had an opportunity to get to know each other and find out what their aspirations, policies are. Most of the United States' strategic allies have political ambassadors, and they are somewhat wanted by the host countries. Most countries reach out to the United States and say, we'd like to have a political ambassador. Like I said, out of about 200 posts around the world, about a third of them, somewhere between 50 and 60, are political. My journey is a very unusual one, as most political ambassadors are. I was raised to take over a family business, and during that particular journey began to expand the company outside the borders of the United States. And in order to work in the countries that we ultimately resided in, Mexico, Brazil, India, and ultimately the United Arab Emirates, you become a diplomat in many, many ways, appreciating other cultures, listening to people really well, understanding how these differences can really add not only to the richness of your experience and of your business, but can also bring better decision-making because of the diversity of their thought process and of course, their life experience. We grew a company quite large, one that started out at about an annual revenue of $25 million to a global footprint of over 2.5 billion. And during that journey, probably organizationally, commercially, relationship-driven, strategy, in many ways parallel what happens in state departments across the globe. And it's all about networking, understanding the values that people have. And upon the election in 2016, President Trump the party and his administration reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in helping the country further its positioning across the globe, and had a particular assignment in mind for me. And it was becoming the ambassador to the UAE. Prior to that, for the approximately 48 years that the UAE has been a country, the United States has always had a career diplomat. And this was a complete departure from the past. And they handpicked me to be that person for a number of reasons. We can get into those later, but there are both strengths and weaknesses that a career ambassador has versus a political ambassador. And it will be interesting to talk about that and to probe what those differences are and what each of us bring to the table.
Love to explore that a little bit more. Thank you for explaining this so clearly, because you're right. There are only two countries I'm aware of that do it this way, in this bifurcated way. Before we get into some of those complexities, let me ask Ambassador Embrechts, what are the key responsibilities of an ambassador in the type of ambassador that you are? And maybe you can also tell us how to think about it in terms of who and what you represent.
Yep, happy to do so. I think at the end of the day, as an ambassador representing the Kingdom of the Netherlands here, you are responsible for the relationship between the Kingdom of the Netherlands and the UAE in the UAE, and to develop it. I think that summarizes the key responsibility as I see it. Now, the key interests, of course, in the UAE, Dutch nationals who are living here, around 8,000 Dutch are living in the UAE. We have to look after their interests as well. Companies, we have around 340, 350 Dutch companies in the UAE. So these are two very important factors of the daily the work we do. But also you advise the Dutch government, Dutch authorities about issues that are at play here, how to handle the issues with the UAE, what to focus on. So it's a kind of dialogue, but as an ambassador of the Netherlands here, you are ultimately responsible for managing that relationship on the ground in the UAE. And in the UAE, I think the key drivers, as I said, is economic, consular work for Dutch community, political work with the UAE government, and developing a cultural agenda. These, I think, are the key responsibilities you have vis-a-vis the UAE authorities.
Let me ask you a quick follow-up question on that. This always is a curiosity I've had as well. Why do ambassadors, and especially these, civil track ambassadors, civil service track ambassadors, as Ambassador Rakolta mentioned, why do they spend so few years in any one country at any one time? You've obviously been back and forth a little bit. Korea, the UAE have played a big role in your journey. You would have thought that spending more time would create stronger connections to the staff, to the country. Can you talk a little bit about the philosophy of tours of duty?
That's a very good point. The idea is to create generalists, generalists. That's the thing. You should be able to work at any given moment, any given country for the Netherlands. Now, that's the starting point of a career. Believe me, I did not choose to go to Tehran. I had a traineeship in New York. Did you like New York? I said no, because I was a boy from a village in the Netherlands. I found New York incredibly overwhelming. I said, great, we have a nice job for you in Tehran. So in the beginning of your career, they move you around a little bit and see what can he do well, what can he not do well. And slowly, they put you in a kind of career track. Now, in my case, it was very obvious that it would be trade and business related and so on. Later on in your career, they also see that, okay, this person performs better in a bilateral dynamic. This means country-to-country arrangement, or in a multilateral dynamic. International organizations like the UN or the EU or whatever it is. More and more, the Dutch Foreign Ministry is also focusing on regional specialists. Try to not, burn the capital you build up. You send someone to a country for 3-4 years, he builds up a network in that country, he gets to understand the people in that country, sometimes he even speaks the languages of that country. Try to capitalize on that more than before. Now that's something that I've seen in the last few years happening, hence my third posting in the UAE, hence 2 postings for me in Korea. But it's not that it is a given like the US, for instance, have. The US, they have really specialists who speak the language, who dive into the culture. They get training for that, they get extra training for that. And they spend their career studying the subcontinent or the Far East and Northeastern countries, or whatever it is. We don't do that. We start from a general point and slowly in the career, you move into a certain direction. But now we reach a point where also specialism is back on the radar screen. But you are right. I have many friends and colleagues who moved around from Africa to Australia to Japan to end up somewhere in Bulgaria. I mean, yes, it's part and parcel of what we do in the Netherlands also. That's true.
I think it's true for many countries, and is perhaps part of the reason that there's a worry that, and maybe 5 years is okay, but that after 20 years you become too much a part of the place instead of remembering the country, the government you're representing?
That's true, but you can do a couple of things. You don't have to keep people for 20 years in a country. You can keep them for 3-4 years and post them back home in the foreign ministry where they're still involved in the regional dynamics or regional politics or whatever it is, and put them in a different country in the same region where they can use their experience and what they've learned back home and capitalize on that. You shouldn't leave people, I think, for an incredibly long time in a country. First of all, like you said, you become part of a country. But the second thing also is you lose the connection with your home base if you don't go back every so many years. And at the end of the day, you represent the Netherlands and you want to be on par with what the Netherlands stands for and what policy is all about.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador Rakolta, I'm really curious how you saw someone who hadn't come from the civil service or from the State Department, in your case, how did you see your key responsibilities? And do you think it's significantly different from the sort of civil servant track that Ambassador Embrechts pursued that also exists within the State Department? If you would unmute, we would love to hear you on that. I think you're sorry, the mic is off, I think. Thank you.
I would say that the job is the same for both of us, but we bring different skills to the post. In the case of the United States, the UAE represents a real strategic partner. And when I came out to post, there was some stress cracks in the relationship, mostly had to do with arms sales and the inability of the United States to deliver on certain things that the Emiratis felt that they needed. And the second thing was perhaps my country's not our full appreciation of the how much political Islam was affecting the decision-making of the UAE. So from that standpoint, what I found different between business and diplomacy is the speak or the language. Now, I'm not talking about, Arabic versus English. I'm talking about how we spoke to each other. And I found that the diplomacy was very structured, very manufactured, talking points developed by the home base. And those talking points were delivered either through demarches or very, very formal protocol sessions where you would sit across the table. And I saw my role as breaking down those particular barriers and trying to engage the Emiratis in what I would call a dialogue that was far franker than anyone had shown me to date, more open, far more honest in terms of our positions, more dynamic, and have a certain level of intellectual tension at the meeting itself so that we could probe what the differences actually were, perhaps be in more of a listening mode than in an explaining mode, and to see if we could begin to develop compromises on some of these positions to ultimately reach some kind of a result. And I think that businessmen are driven to reaching results quickly. And we have a higher risk quotient than perhaps a career diplomat might have. The worst thing that would have happened to me if I would have stepped over the line or got a bad reaction, I would have been recalled, asked to resign. I would have gone back to my previous life and my life would have continued to go on. In many respects, that's not true for a career diplomat. I think that they are in a system that requires more consensus building, more diplomacy, more political speak, if you will. And they're not quite as willing to be as bold as perhaps a businessman would be. And so I came out to post with that sort of thought in mind. Now, what was my job? Is really quite a simple job. You can put it into 3 buckets. There's the operational aspect of the embassy itself. There are over 1,000 people working in the UAE on behalf of the US government, and that doesn't include the armed forces. We have approximately 8,000 military personnel in country, a handful of bases, military bases, but those were somebody else's responsibility. So I had 1,000 people, roughly half Americans and half what they call LES, locally employed staff. And so managing that and all the complications that come about is one job. The second job is to rationalize the policy between our 2 countries and to see if the values, the aspiration, the direction that we're going in, we're in alignment. And I would have to say that 90% of the United States' vision of the future matches up perfectly with the UAE. And included in that is a defense, intelligence, counterterrorism, law enforcement, border control, economic development, trade, investment, culture, education, space, human rights. And so the United States has 35 different agencies and departments, all have a stake in the UAE and represented, and the ambassador is responsible for all of that. So that policy is a really, really big point. And then the final point is what the ambassador has already spoken, that's managing the relationship between the 2 countries, the bilateral relationship, and that is done at various levels. The United States was doing really quite well at managing that relationship, either from Washington at the top or in the bureaucracy at the mid-level or upper mid-level of the relationships between the United States and the UAE. And developing that relationship, that one-on-one networking, that trust, to be able to go back to those kind of dialogues that I had previously mentioned. One-on-one dialogues really could get to the heart of the matter and what obstacles we had to push out of the way in order to get an agreement on something was really what my main responsibility was. I had an excellent DCM, that stands for Deputy Chief of Mission, who handled the operational aspect. But one of the things that I wasn't completely tuned in on until I got there was the legal authority that a US ambassador has in host country. It took me 90 days to realize the enormity of that legal responsibility and the fact that I was actually representing the President of the United States himself. And whatever I said, either publicly or privately, was taken as coming from the President of the United States. And so this was not unusual for me because, of course, when I ran this big company, all statements and all strategies were attributed to me. So I found that rather comfortable, and I didn't have any problem of working and finding unique solutions that perhaps were a little different than had been tried in the past in trying to solve some of these intractable problems.
That's quite an incredibly informative statement and perspective. And I can well imagine that your goal of having these honest conversations, Ambassador Rakolta, at least initially must have come up against traditions that are also very deeply held and important values attendant on diplomacy that are fostered in the State Department. And you talked about 1,000 employees. I'm sure you didn't work with all of them directly all the time. Yeah, maybe you can't speak to this so easily, but was there resistance? Was there change management that also had to absorb your time, especially when you asked for more direct talking points, say, or you sometimes might not like the script?
I found that the individuals at the State Department, especially the embassy, received me with open arms. I'm different, and I would bring my direct reports into my office upon arrival, and it was almost like an interview process. You know, what makes you tick? Here's what makes me tick. And the bottom line to me is that without a team, you can't get anything accomplished in today's world. And so I said to them, you can always trust me. I'll always deal with you straight up. I'm not politically motivated. I don't have another job that I'm angling for in the administration. I just want to make this post and all of us participate in a way that we can all be proud of at the end of my term. I had an open door policy. I did not, they had to come and close my door many, many times because of the way I operated my business was everything was open door. That was something that I had to learn, that not everything in an embassy can be open door. There's a lot of classified and confidential information. But generally speaking, if you were to talk to the direct reports, they had free access to me. I listened to them very well. I tried not to get emotional on any issues whatsoever. I always tried to think 24 hours before I made a decision to see if it was in the best interest of the embassy and in the individual. And I said, I'm a change agent. Was not sent out here to manage the status quo. I was sent out here to be a disruptor. And it only took a couple of months for them to see some of the wisdom and advantages of that. And they supported me in every possible way that I could ever imagine. And I've paid them the highest compliment by saying there isn't a single person that I didn't work for, that I didn't have the highest respect, and that given other circumstances, I would hire them to work in my own company. And so I found the experience absolutely positive. There's very little negative that I can say. I think that the bureaucracies, and I only speak of the United States, have developed well past the need to have all of this control, and the people don't have the freedom that they should to make informed decisions and living and perhaps dying on those decisions. And of course, I'm only too happy to do that. As I said earlier, my risk profile is much, much different than theirs. And I appreciated that. And we talked openly about it. And many times I would always take the advice, listen to everybody. I think that all this international business experience that I went through and going to a foreign country and listening to what people had to say before making an informed decision made them feel part of the team. And not all the time did everybody get what they wanted. They always I didn't do what they said, but I always listened to them first and had great debates about which direction we should go in.
Thank you for speaking so powerfully to teamwork and trusting your team. I think for the many students who also listen in for general leadership and career advice and ideas, I think what you've said about trusting the team, and also you're clearly someone who pays attention to talent and knowing full well that you may run into them again and you may even hope to work with some of them again. This has served me very well over the years, and I think it's great to hear you say that also in this context. Ambassador Embrechts, back to you. I think you both have said such powerful things about language and speaking clearly, but within a certain framework that you can get your diplomatic goals accomplished. Very different for your countries, but it's the same principle. In your long career in the Foreign Service for the Netherlands, can you talk a little bit? There must be moments that you have to do something because you represent the government. You're not representing yourself. And surely sometimes you may have to say or do things that you're not completely thrilled about, to put it mildly. Can you talk a little bit about how you handle that kind of managing that kind of potential conflict in diplomacy?
Yes, I can. I want to do that. No problem at all. It goes for all of us, doesn't it? I mean, everybody who's in a certain position sometimes has to get a message out that it's not really 100% his own message, I think. But as an ambassador or as a diplomat, you have to do that sometimes as well. You represent the government, and government's positions are sometimes not your own position, and the other way around as well. I one time had a problem with that, I think. That was when I was posted in Iraq. After my posting in Dubai, I went to Iraq. The Americans had invaded, so to speak, Iraq, and I worked with the Office of Ambassador Bremer. And there I could see a system unfolding that I really could not subscribe to. And I found it more and more difficult to be part of that. And it was part of my decision. It played a big role, I think, in my decision to leave the foreign ministry at one point and to move to the corporate world. Because there are certain things you can do, you have to do as a leader, as a member of an organization, as representing a country. But sometimes things come too close to you and you don't want to be part of something they force you to be part of. And for me, that was a moment when I thought, there must be more in life. There must be another career where I could be more myself than what I had to do there in Iraq. But I guess what you're saying is true. Sometimes you have to bring a message that's decided upon by your home office, by your minister or prime minister or parliament. And you think, yeah, I would not have done this, but that's all in the game. You have to do it. That's true.
It's true for many jobs, I think, and especially in big organizations with country governments certainly are. What brought you back? Because you didn't stay away long. You returned to public service. What pulled you back?
Well, yeah, the idea was like this. When I told the foreign ministry that, look, this is what happened in Iraq, and I've chosen to do something else, they said, well, you're leaving the government, you're leaving diplomatic service for the wrong reasons. And we do understand that you're going to work for Shell Oil Company. However, there is also a strategic relation to be developed with a company like Shell. Would you mind being seconded? And if you still want to go and work for Shell after a year, 2 years, then all the best. We wish you good luck the rest of your career. However, if you feel that you want to return to the government, you're welcome to do so. Well, in about a year, I was about a year working for Shell, International Government Relations. We were with a small group of people advising the chief executive at that time. They asked me to return to the foreign ministry to take up the position of ambassador to Malaysia, where also big energy issues were in play. You had territorial disputes there between Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei. You had all of a sudden the biofuel dynamic coming up. So having the Shell experience, having the network in the energy world, they sent me to become ambassador to Malaysia. That's how I returned. And then the deal with Shell was basically, okay, do that. If you still want to return to us after Malaysia, you're more than welcome to come back. That's what happened.
Well, it's great that you returned, for us certainly. I want to talk about a few topical problems that affect ambassadorships. They affect all of us, but I want to hear you on how they affect especially policy questions. Ambassador Rakolta gave that very helpful 3 buckets. There's ops, of course, but importantly, there is policy rationalization and then maintenance of relationships. And in the period, almost exactly commensurate with the time that you've been in the UAE on your current or most recent tours, the pandemic affected everything that our operations did, but I'm almost more interested in hearing you talk about the effects of the coronavirus crisis, this global crisis, on your work as a diplomat. Can you talk a little bit about, how this affected really the core diplomatic aspects of your work. Maybe we can start with Ambassador Rakolta.
So the coronavirus, I believe, caused all of us to realize that we're one humanity. And that one humanity was needed to look forward and to solve the problems of the world and stop looking backwards and redressing old fights, if you will. It played very well into three of the major accomplishments that my country was able to get done, and ultimately led to the fourth major accomplishment, which is what the Abraham Accords. I'm not so sure the Abraham Accords would have gotten done last year if it hadn't been for COVID. There were many, many factors that came into play that brought Israel, the United States, and the UAE together, all at this one moment in time. And all of those factors were each one of them affected by COVID. I'll just name a couple of them that might be helpful for you to consider. One of them is the collapse of the global economy, and how do we get out of the malaise of a declining economic footprint, and finding new partners, new markets is really a wonderful way to begin to grow out of that kind of particular problem. Technology was also playing a huge role in the world. It had been moving so fast, so forward, so quickly. And COVID just sped that up and took things that might take 7, 8, 9, or 10 years to roll out. All of a sudden, they were being rolled out in less than a year. Zoom and Microsoft, and just the ability like this to have this kind of a conversation globally. Just look how clear the connections are, how we're able to see each other, but even more importantly, how we're willing to accept not sitting face to face for every single meeting. This accelerated the need to bring our countries closer together. The UAE's need to transition from an oil-based economy to a knowledge-based economy and to build a large middle class was also accelerated by COVID. Our ability to put differences aside, I can remember the UAE sent a plane full of humanitarian and personal equipment to the Palestinians just as COVID was reaching its pinnacle, and landed an airplane in Jerusalem, and the Palestinians were quite upset with that. But after a couple of weeks of some rather skillful diplomacy, they accepted the gift and the help that the Emiratis had given. I think Israel, to a certain degree, annexation played into this, and how the Abraham Accords were able to at least put annexation on a temporary hold. The actual collapse of about the economies of 4 countries, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Libya, all were exacerbated by COVID and caused leaders such as the UAE to say, we've got to find another way. We've got to look forward to peace and prosperity. No longer can war and violence and the destruction of countries, they take literally generations upon generations to repair that kind of damage. And so finally, I'll say about COVID, it caused all of us to work much closer together. This was a pandemic that affected all of humanity. Even though it's far from being over, I think the world in many respects has come together like it never has before. And so as bad as COVID has been, as I don't remember how many hundreds of millions of people have been affected, millions of deaths, the silver lining in such a terrible malaise and pandemic has been for us to come together in many, many ways that we may not have if COVID hadn't appeared on the horizon. It might have taken decades as opposed to one simple year to get all this done.
It's a powerful statement reminding us of that 1 year and everything that's changed, and some of it for better or to stay. Ambassador Embrechts, what was your experience?
Well, as an ambassador, everything changed. Really, everything changed. Because what we do, you make a year plan, you get your budgets, you get your people allocated, and all that. And all of a sudden, there's Corona, right? And your whole agenda, all priorities are changing. One of the first things we got confronted with, and this is for everybody who's looking at a job in diplomacy, we had to get Dutch people home. Very simple. Quite a few Dutch people got stranded in the UAE. And we needed to get them home. All of a sudden, the airlines didn't fly anymore, so we had to find ways to get them out. There were a lot of Dutch people on, for instance, dredging boats in the Gulf, working in Qatar, working in the broader region here. We had to get them back to Holland. So then you use your network, then you use your contacts to get the people to, in this case, Wasafema, fly in a plane and get them out. So you as an embassy, all of a sudden you have to improvise. You have to get in a different mode, in a different gear to help the Dutch people that need help at that particular moment. Talking about embassy staff, health became an issue all of a sudden. Schools got closed. Parents were all of a sudden obliged to do homeschooling, home teaching, right? So your whole office dynamic is changing, and we don't have 1,000 people. We just, consulate and embassy together. Perhaps we have around 50 people working in the diplomatic field in the UAE. So all of a sudden, we had to look after more than ever before personal interests of people as well. Healthcare in general. How do I look after my staff members? Right? What can I do with them? What can I not do with them? The outreach to UAE authorities, where we used to visit them, sit with them, drink coffee with them, talk with them, a little bit like Ambassador Rakolta said, you need that personal dimension to get to the issues, to feel what can be done, what cannot be done. Where can we go with the Netherlands and the UAE together? All of a sudden, you're talking against a screen, and the whole human dimension is disappearing. So the work changed dramatically, and then the expo got cancelled. So a lot of our plans, a lot of our ambitions, we had to put part in the freezer. Other ones, we could just implement them in a different way. So yes, it meant a lot for us in both a professional way, by really feeling the responsibility for Dutch people in the UAE and how to help them. For my staff, making sure that they are okay, that they're healthy, give them space and time to be home with family, with children, or whatever is needed. And the outreach, our ambition, our plans changed a lot as well. So yes, Corona had on a micro level UAE for us as the Dutch community and embassy really an impact, absolutely.
Well, with a little luck, we'll get Expo 2020 this fall. Many ambassadors have made the same point to me about they had their entire calendars full for the second half of 2020. That was all about the expo, and so we now get to enjoy that, I hope, later in the year. Another phenomenon that I think affects everyone's business, but I'm really curious how it affects the work of diplomats, because I can imagine it's complicated. Social media is obviously shifting the relationship of politicians to the public in many spheres. How is social media affecting the ambassador's role? How is it helping? How is it sometimes hindering? I'm curious. So maybe I'll stick with you, Ambassador Embrechts, for the Dutch perspective on this.
Well, social media is just one thing, but if you think about the role of diplomacy, the role of a diplomat, when I started my diplomatic career in Tehran, we were writing telegrams, and everything was sent on a kind of coded machine to the Netherlands. Now, and that was news for the Netherlands. That was the message from Tehran coming in, and everybody in the foreign ministry was reading it. Now, BBC, Reuters, and others, they have the news worldwide on screen or whatever before I can even write my report. So, in terms of the role of diplomacy, it has changed dramatically throughout the years as well. And for the Netherlands, the news behind the news is becoming far more important. The networks you build in countries, hence also the relationships, keeping people longer in a certain field, in a certain area, is becoming more and more and more important. Now, to go to your question about social media, of course, social media, but we also use it.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't see it as a threat. I see it as a tremendous opportunity to brand my country, to reach out with messages to target groups that normally would have been, out of sight for me. But young people, they are online almost 24/7. So I can talk with young people. I can communicate with them. I can get responses from them. And do we get it right? No way. Do we have all the answers? No way. But we as an embassy, as a government, we are trying in different ways to use social media to connect people to whatever we're doing, getting feedback, and to reach out with, I believe, a good story about the Netherlands.
I follow those feeds very eagerly, I should say. That said, Ambassador Rakolta, social media, was it a complicating, a helping factor for your work as ambassador?
I think it plays a very, very important role, not only in the diplomacy and ambassadors' role, but also in life today. The simple answer, it makes it so much easier to communicate directly with people and to avoid the slant, if you will, of people taking your message and manipulating it. You can speak directly to your constituency in a way that you never have had the opportunity to have done before. It is an absolute incredible platform. I don't think we've learned how to use it totally or effectively yet as we could. But I do know that our embassy posted quite regularly on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, had a rather large following. And I always read the comments coming back, the reaction. I think those provided an incredible, valuable tool. I'm really a large believer in continuous improvement. And in order to really take advantage of continuous improvement, you need to be able to listen to people and for them to tell you how you could be better. And that's hard for people to take. Generally, we always like to think of ourselves as doing a really good job and always hitting the ball out of the park, if I could use an analogy from baseball. But the truth of the matter is we're human. We make lots of mistakes. And when you can get to a point in time of listening to people point those mistakes out and trying to learn from those mistakes, that's perhaps the most valuable piece of advice that you can get. Getting yourself into the right position and how to get that kind of information is really the difficult journey. And the internet and the social media plays a role. Yes, a lot of it can be derogatory and not helpful, but there's so much of it. The trend lines, the comments, the thought out paragraphs that are written are all incredibly valuable. And I took all of those to heart and really thought deeply about them. And, what role did I play and how could I change going forward to either make that issue or that person more receptive to what I was saying.
These are quite positive views of social media at a time that, of course, there is a big debate. And I think some of these points are important for us to think about. I'm going to leave that issue aside for the time being. I really want to hear from both of you what you think some of the shining or defining and or shining, they can be both, of course, moments in your career as a diplomat where you felt you made a difference. I think since Ambassador Embrechts has had the longer career in diplomacy, I'm going to start with him. It's probably harder for you to answer too, but can you give an example of where you really felt your role as a diplomat?
Where could I make a difference, right? I guess, Marit, what I'm really proud, I'm going to take you back to Korea, my Korea days.
Please.
During my first time in Korea, I got to know the Korean War veterans, elderly people visiting Korea again, etc., etc., etc. Now, for most of them, these visits were very emotional. They came to Korea during the Korean War. They were young men, 19, 20, 21 years old. They saw the most horrible, terrible things and destruction, and they left. And their whole lives, they carried that with them somehow. They were not in a position to give that a certain place because, back home, act normal, get a job, and look after your family. That was the main the main line for everyone. And I learned that when they came back to Korea, it was part of a healing process because they could see how the country had grown, how the country had developed, how the people were actually also very grateful for what they had done during the Korean War. So when I became ambassador to Korea, I reconnected with the veteran organizations and made it a point to work together with the Korean government to invite as many as possible, because they were old men in their 80s, sometimes 90s, to come back to Korea, make them see that they were part of what Korea has become today, and make them feel the gratitude of the Korean people. And we did that 3-4 times per year. A group came to Korea, and that even, I don't know if that's really something to be proud of, but it touched me tremendously that from this group, 3 people who passed away decided that they wanted to be buried in Korea with their brothers in arms because of the gratitude they felt in Korea and the contribution they've given to the country. And they asked me then to preside over these funerals in Korea, which is maybe, but for me, it was something like I've done something well for people, old people, in the way of making them give all these nasty, terrible experiences a place in their life and to perhaps close a chapter for them, for their wives, and for their children. And that is something that it's kind of human element of diplomacy. It's part of reaching out beyond policy. It is something that I believe is equally important, if not perhaps more important, to focus on. And when you're asking me if there's something you're proud of, this is something that always made me feel proud that I am an ambassador. I can do this. I can make this difference. I can bring them here and I can help them process what they have experienced as young men in this country. Does that answer your question in a way or not?
It's an extraordinarily beautiful answer. Thank you very much. I'm sure it made a huge difference in the lives of many people, not just those 3 and their families, but many people. Ambassador Rakolta, it's been a whirlwind, a year and a half, even a little bit shy of that. A lot of change you already mentioned. What do you think was your most significant accomplishment while here?
I've been asked that question many times, and there are actually 4 that I'm extraordinarily proud not only of the accomplishment, but of the team effort that the embassy put forth under some very, very trying circumstances. The first was Expo 2020. The United States was essentially dead in the water as a participation in Expo. We had a failed model of a corporate giving that had basically been used for a couple of decades to participate in these expos around the world. And that model never really produced what I would consider a superlative product. And it came apart just before I arrived at post. And also our Congress had made a definitive decision not to fund participation in Expo. And so trying to come up with a solution and then get ready in an accelerated period of time was something that I quite frankly didn't know how that would all turn out the day I landed. And much to my surprise, the generosity of the Emiratis, the forward thinking of the embassy staff, the dedication of the Expo team from the United States, all bound together very, very quickly and gave me the support that I needed to go and begin some serious discussions with the Emiratis on the second day that I was here. So I'm extraordinarily pleased that we were able to and will be able to participate in Expo this coming October. The second thing is a little bit more elusive, and it's what I would refer to as our strategic dialogue. So the United States has a method of dealing with its best allies called the strategic dialogue. And this is a way of really elevating our conversations and solutions to a very, very high level. And after about 2 months here, in the UAE, I had come to the conclusion that we needed to find a different way to communicate because our relationship had stagnated. And I went back to Washington and visited with the National Security Council, and they offered me the opportunity to offer to the Emiratis this strategic dialogue. And over the last 15 months now, we have built this out to something that's world-class and will really change the dynamics of our relationship going forward. So much so that it led from the Emirati standpoint, led to the Abraham Peace Accords. It was an essential factor that allowed us to broach topics that heretofore had never, ever even thought of being discussed, let alone coming to a solution. And then the final one is just the whole embassy response to COVID and how that had challenged all of us to find new ways to continue to build a relationship, to continue to work from home, to continue to use these new platforms, communication. I remember for February and March, I had over 65 Zoom calls with the Emirati leadership because we couldn't meet in person. And we were able to overcome the distance, if you will, whether it was 5 miles or 8,000 miles, as it is in this case, and find a new way to be able to take that strategic dialogue and build it into a major, major element of the UAE-USA relationship.
No small things in a short period. Let me ask you both a little on about some of the implications of what you've said. I'll stick with Ambassador Rakolta for a second. Can you talk a little bit more about the implications of the normalization of relations between the UAE and Israel? You witnessed it up close. I know you were in Washington to attend the signing ceremony for the Abraham Accords. And of course, the question that's on the mind of so many in our community and around the world is, do you envision any solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in a broader sense within this decade?
I do. I think that there are several things that are in play right now. I think the most important one is that we all recognize that war and violence never can lead to a lasting peace solution. At best, war declares a winner and a loser, and there's decades upon decades of retribution and revenge, not to speak of the tremendous capital requirements to repair all the damage that is done. I think, quite frankly, that the world has come to a place that sees that that is no longer a viable solution in any case. Even today, how countries test each other, the responses are thought out, they're measured, nobody wants to escalate. And so when you think about how we all recognize that war and violence is no longer a solution, then you have to look forward and say that what is the solution? And there is only one solution. It's called a political settlement. And a political settlement requires negotiation. Each party has to bring to the table its best argument, has to listen well, has to put all of its facts on the table, negotiate the best they can, make the best deal they can, and move forward. And until that process starts, there won't be any progress made. And I've never been able to understand is what's the risk of sitting down and talking. The worst that can happen is that you walk away with no agreement. I don't understand the need for preconditions. And so to answer your question, quite frankly, what has to happen is the Palestinian leadership and the Israeli leadership have to sit down face to face, and they have to solve this amongst themselves with the assistance of others. And there's many things that the United States and the Gulf states can do to encourage, to help, to bring other assets to the table. But at the end of the day, there has to be the resolve on both of those parties to sit down. We can't solve this for them.
I'd like to ask the same question of Ambassador Embrechts in a slightly different way. Of course, you were not like the United States, closely involved in the crafting of the Abraham Accord. With several normalization accords now signed between Israel and other Arab world countries, how does this development affect multinational support for the Palestinian people in these conversations, these negotiations, for them to get started again? What's the Dutch view?
Sorry?
What's the Dutch view?
The Dutch view. The Dutch view is, first of all, we are happy that the Abraham Accord is there. Absolutely, no doubt about that one. At the same time, we're happy that the Middle East peace plan negotiations are shaping up again as well. I think we may have differed a bit with the US. I don't think we fully subscribed to the peace plan as it was forwarded before and the support the US has always given to Israel. We believe that there is indeed no harm in talking, we should talk, and that's the only way to solve this two-state issue. That's what we believe in, and we're happy that the Middle East negotiations, peace negotiations, will be back on track and on the agenda as well, again, in the Biden administration.
Thank you both for commenting on what is obviously less of a career issue than something that's of burning interest to so many. So I thank you for speaking to it. Let me turn to a few questions from our community here. This is a very practical question. Where to start a career in diplomacy after the university? Is working for the government important? A government, I guess? Or is it possible to start in the private sector, business, NGOs? I would like to ask Ambassador Embrechts, you must have seen different pathways of people into the Dutch Foreign Service. Can you speak to this?
Yeah, I think the answer is actually, if I look at my service, the people we recruit, I think 9 out of 10, come from a different career or have some prior work experience. Either they worked for a corporate, either they've been a lawyer, or they have worked for another government organization or an NGO, but they did not jump straight from university into the diplomatic service. There's always been a kind of in-between thing that shapes their mind, that sparks their interest, etc. So for us, it is really important that people show that they are really committed, interested, and that it came from somewhere. So straight from university, not so much in the Dutch Foreign Ministry, I would say.
So that suggests that students really can follow their stars and their interests in the way that you've already recommended, actually, before. So this is a question really for both of you. What are the top 3 skills in diplomacy? Top 3 skills that we, the students, should be working on from now, if you wanted to be in diplomacy? What are the 3 skills? Let's Ambassador Rakolta, please.
I think that the skills in diplomacy are the same skills that you need to be successful in life. The first one is an ability to listen well. And when I say listen, I don't mean hearing. I mean listening and trying to process what the other person is saying. Number 2, I think you have to have incredible character, a character of honesty, a character of continuous learning, a character of hard work, a character of kindness, a character of passion for what you're doing. So that would be the second thing, what the shape of your character. And then the third thing would be your skill set, your own individual skill set. And I think the diplomats need to be able to put their thoughts and paper down very, very well. You have to be a good writer and be able to succinctly put down your thoughts and be able to make your points. You need to be a good public speaker because you're communicating the ideals, the aspirations, and the policies of your government on a daily basis. And that speaking is both privately and publicly. the best way to do that is to start learning. They say that other than death, the biggest fear that persons have in the world is public speaking. So that skill set is just so important for your ultimate success. So that's what I would say that you need to be able to do. Let me just add one more thing. A well definition of your own values. Why are you here? What's your purpose in life? And you can combine all three of those together. You can accomplish anything that you set out to do.
Excellent advice, Ambassador Embrechts.
Yeah, a lot of things have been said already. Yeah? I totally subscribe to the view that you need to listen well. You need to have a kind of built-in curiosity. You need to be curious in other people, in cultures, and what makes them tick. What's the story behind the story, if you like. So you need to be a curious person and willing to learn. It's really not a one-way traffic. Absolutely not. You need to be willing to learn and to listen to other people in order to understand them, and process that information in terms of what can it do for you and your country. What I also would like to tell you is something different, is that I think it's really important to stay close to yourself. What do I mean by that? Very, very often I come across people who want to be diplomats, and they have this idea about what a diplomat should be all about, and they start acting like that or behaving like that. I think you're at your best. I think you're at your strongest when you're close to yourself. And that's also what I want to give to the students. Don't try to be something you're not. Try to stay close to yourself. Try to be who you are. And then be curious. Listen to people. Make friends. And I think social skills, be it someone who can deliver a message or a speech, but social skills, connect with people, really, really important values. And it doesn't as well. And whether you speak 5 languages, 10 languages, or 2 languages, I think whatever you bring as a human being is ultimately more important than anything else.
Thank you both for speaking to humanity, purpose, and also good writing and speaking. Thank you. At the university, we obviously value all of these real values and skills that you've spoken to. Here is one of these wide open, large questions that if anyone could answer them, they would win the internet and more. But I'm going to ask you on behalf of Sanjar, what is the future of diplomacy and international relations in the next 10 to 15 years? A big trends question, which of course is very important to our soon-to-be graduates. What kind of forecasting would you like to do? I will make this our last question, so you can take a little time on it. Ambassador Rakolta, what lies ahead for the world of diplomacy and international relations? And you can take the business perspective on this as well, now that you're back in private practice.
I think that we underinvest in diplomacy today. If you take the United States, for instance, we spend pretty close to $1 trillion a year on defense and security. We spend less than 1/10 of that amount on diplomacy and goodwill.
Wow.
So I believe that we've underinvested in diplomacy, and I do believe, and by the way, diplomacy has a much better return on its dollar spent than any other form of contact with foreign government. So I predict a very bright future for diplomacy going forward. We need more of it. We need to better connect with the countries that we are not on friendly terms with. And so that's number one. Number two, I think that there are 2 areas that we need to, or 3 areas that we need to expand greatly. One of them is the business world. And if you look at the UAE, they've identified a number of new industries that they need help in. They need investment, they need talent, and that's transportation, space, all forms of technology, educational alignment, healthcare and research, water and ecological consumption and food security, clean energy, fintech and how the internet has changed the whole financial world, advanced manufacturing. These are all areas that provide us with this opportunity to better connect between the United States and the UAE, but quite frankly, with every single country in the world. So business is even a more important aspect to linking up our countries together than ever before. I'll just take a little side note right here. When you really look at what causes countries to be strategic allies for centuries and centuries, or decades and decades, it's a common language, it's common values, it's a sharing of cultures, education, and life experiences. So business is really a big aspect of that. Cultural connection is another one, whether it's through art or music, literature. These are ways that we can connect our societies and get to better understand each other in ways that the richness of our differences are revered and respected and loved, not humiliated and degraded. And then the final thing is just the sharing of resources. The more wealthy countries have to become far more engaged in sharing those resources and make sure those kind of resource investments are put to good use in the countries that need them the most. And where is this all done? This is all done through diplomacy and through state departments. This is the best way that we can, as a humanity, to build a world into the future that we hope for.
Thank you. Ambassador Embrechts.
Well, again, a lot has been said already, but if you look at the issues the world will face the coming 10, 20 years, right? Environment, food crisis, water, energy, developing countries, how do we deal with them? These are issues that are so big, so huge, that they require international cooperation. You can debate the format, you can debate the way to go about it, but they in particular will require diplomacy. People to reach out, people to connect, etc., etc. So I think there is, in that sense, there will always be a need for diplomacy. And as the Netherlands, we very much believe in multilateralism. We believe that countries do have to work together to solve these big issues at hand. We cannot go at it alone. Absolutely not. We talked earlier about the internet and social media and all that. This will never replace human contacts. Never. If anything, it emphasizes the need to have human contacts, to have face-to-face dialogues on what's going on, what's again the news behind the news, and how can we work together in solving these big issues. So when you talk about diplomacy, there will be a shift. Like diplomacy now is a very different animal than when I started my career. The whole thing has changed dramatically. It will continue to develop itself, but the need for people to engage, the need for people to work together to solve the big issues at hand will remain. It will remain. And that is something I very much believe in. So diplomacy is far from that. It's very much alive, and it will be alive for the next 15, 20 years to come.
Ambassadors, John and Lody, I want to thank you both so much for this really ringing set of endorsements from different angles of the value of diplomacy, fostering human solidarity and collaboration, because we only have one planet and we're only one humanity, and we have to figure out how to do things together. You're both very busy people. I really want to thank you for taking the time with us, answering questions so forthrightly, and also diplomatically in the best sense of the word. Being a diplomat doesn't just mean being nice. It means being clear and having clear goals and executing on them. I really find it very beautiful what you've told us. Ambassador Embrechts, we hope to see you on campus very soon. Ambassador Rakolta, we expect to see you back in this country very often, where you leave a very significant legacy. Thank you so much from all of us at NWO Abu Dhabi, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us. Thank you.
Bye-bye.